What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Steelers Breakdown. Nick Farabaugh with you guys here today. We are one day away from the NFL draft. Lots to talk about today, but today I wanted to take some questions from you guys. So I floated some questions out there. What do you guys want to know? And let's go through some of these. I'll try to answer some of them. We'll start off with the George Pickens question. I received about 10 of these before I could even count. And specifically, where the Steelers look at George Pickens and what would they trade him for? Because you didn't see Jordan Schultz of Fox Sports reported that the Steelers have taken calls and made calls on George Pickens. So let me talk about the George Pickens trade smoke. I've talked about it a little bit. Guys, the Steelers are not actively shopping George Pickens. They have not been actively shopping George Pickens all offseason. Their intention right now is for George Pickens to be on their football team next year. But there's no guarantee that he's going to sign an extension. The Steelers really, I don't think, are looking at him as an extension candidate this summer. And as a result, things could get a little ugly this offseason if that happens. Here's what I'll say. I think the Steelers are going to have to be blown away by an offer. Back in 2022, when the Steelers traded Chase Claypool, they also really weren't looking to trade Chase Claypool. It wasn't necessarily their intention to trade him, but then the Bears came in with the second round pick offer, and the Steelers had to take that. I think that's the similar vein here that we're looking at. I think it's not preposterous to think they could get that. They're not going to trade him though for a late third, an early fourth. They're not going to trade him for that. They'll just keep him and play him opposite of DK Metcalf. That's always been the plan. The Steelers very much do right now have him in their plans. So am I buying it? Maybe. And here's the thing: it's a weaker trade class. For wide receivers, it's a weaker class for wide receivers, period. And so George Pickens is going to be one of those top names that teams are going to look at and try and get. I think a team like the Green Bay Packers could be very interesting. They've been a team that's thrown around. I think the Dallas Cowboys could be thrown around. Could they get number 44 overall from the Dallas Cowboys? They would take that for sure. Would get them another player, I think, that could change their offense. But am I buying it right now? Not particularly. They have talked all offseason about pairing him and DK Metcalf. So unless the Steelers are blown away by an offer, I do not think they're going to move him. What would a blown away offer look like? I think a late first, something in that second round range would constitute that. But right now, I don't think it's going to happen, but we will see. Teams can get desperate. If the Steelers do get the right offer, it wouldn't be stunning. So I'm leaning right now towards Pickens being a Steeler after the draft. But we will see how teams get desperate, what the offers will be. The Steelers have received calls from teams. They have not been making outright efforts to trade George Pickens at all. So we will look into that throughout the draft. Obviously, that's going to be a big storyline if George Pickens does get moved at some point. But that is kind of just wanting to get that albatross out of the way because that's been the big question for most people today that have kind of asked me things. Hey, what about George Pickens? And I think um, that one is it's going to be a big one, but I don't think he's going to get moved. This is an interesting question from Savion Mixon. What are the chances that Kirk Cousins is a Steeler by the end of the weekend? It's another thing that's been floating around this week with no Aaron Rodgers signed to the Pittsburgh Steelers, of course. They don't have a veteran quarterback. And as a result of that, Steelers have two quarterback needs, and they will fill that veteran quarterback spot with someone at some point. George Pickens, kind of factors into this a little bit, I think, because if you have two really good wide receivers, you need a quarterback to throw in there. I do think that Kirk Cousins, though, and I have a long, hard time kind of seeing them get this desperate for Kirk Cousins. I think it would be taking a long time for them to get to the point where they would kind of go towards Kirk Cousins. Man, Cousins, was a turnover machine last year. We know the Steelers really value taking care of the football. He didn't have any mobility at all. He's less mobile than Aaron Rodgers is. Um, and he would cost a lot of money. They'd have to take on $20 million in his salary reportedly. Adam Schefter reported that, and they'd have to trade a draft pick. So unless the Falcons are giving you a significant draft pick in return to take on his salary, this doesn't make much sense at all to me. So the odds that he's a Steeler by the end of the weekend, I mean, I don't know, 5%. I don't really see this happening. I don't see this coming together during the NFL draft. So we'll see if that happens. I think it happens way closer to training camp when it becomes clear that Aaron Rodgers won't sign if that happens. I still think Rodgers at some point between now and training camp will end up inking with the Steelers. I'm fairly confident that will happen. We will see. The more I talk to people, the less they think he's going to retire. They'd be surprised. The Steelers organization would be quite surprised if he retired, to be quite honest with you. So, Kirk Cousins being a Steeler, I don't really buy it. This one from Parker Blake asking me just a general NFL draft question. What trades are we going to see on Thursday? No way all 32 stick and pick. How early can Jackson Dart go? Um, I've been skeptical a lot. If you guys have listened, that we will see a lot of trades in this group. I just think the lack of blue chip prospects um, is not going to give you a ton of trade opportunities because teams aren't going to be wanting to trade up for them. Now, it's interesting because the Steelers, in particular, are the type of team that when you look at it, you say, man, could Pittsburgh really dive into a trade back scenario? And I think they could. If they don't love Shadur Sanders and don't want to take him there, we've talked about that before. Is that a scenario? I do think there's a bit of a scenario where the Steelers maybe look at that and say, man, this is our trade back opportunity. So could they be involved? Sure. I think the Broncos at 20 makes sense. I think the Buccaneers at 19 makes sense. I think the back half is where you're going to see a lot, probably more action than the top half. Maybe a top half the team tries to go up and get Ashton Genty, or tries to go up and get one of those edge rushers if they fall. I don't think we're going to see a ton of movement there, though. I think we're going to see it more towards the back half. A team like the Chiefs trying to come up to get an offensive lineman. A team like the Bills trying to get a corner. I could see that happening. The Texans at 26 or 25 rather, trying to get an offensive lineman. Like that's where I think we could see this coming up. So I think we'll see, three or four trades, and you probably won't have as an expensive a tag on those picks either, right? That could facilitate more trades in this area of the draft because if there's not premium blue chip prospects, guys with first round grades that are perceived that way in the NFL, then theoretically the price tag to trade back will be less. So I do think we will see about three or four trades there. I also think we'll see at least one team come up into the first round for a quarterback, whether that is Shadur Sanders ahead of the Steelers, whether that's a team in the late first trying to come up to get Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe. We will see. But I do think we will see at least one team pop up into the bottom half of this first round here, whether that's the Browns, the Giants. I could definitely see the Saints coming up from 40. Taking an offensive lineman at 9 or an edge rusher, and then coming back up and trying to get Jackson Dart. They're big Jackson Dart fans. I think that is a possibility for sure. So the Steelers are kind of in the middle of that mess. So maybe there's like more of a likelihood they could trade back than I thought. Not because they don't want to, but maybe they'll actually have more options. We'll see. But I do think three or four teams will probably end up trading back there in the first round. I don't think it's going to be super prevalent early in the draft, but I think later on day one, it probably gets a little bit higher. So I do think that is kind of interesting when you're looking at this. This is a crazy question from Omar Construction Inc. Good for him. That's a great name. If the DTs and running backs are gone, so I'm assuming that means all three of the defensive tackles are gone, plus Amari and Hampton and Ashton Genty. Jahdae Barron's gone. Pickens gets extended and no one is willing to trade back. Do you take the best wide receiver available or take Colson Loveland? That is an interesting idea. So, assuming in this case you have all of your running backs gone, all your defensive tackles gone, Jahdae Barron's gone, and I'm going to assume in this one we're also going to say Shadur Sanders is probably gone. You're kind of stuck there with maybe Tedero McMillan on the board. I mean, I think that's a really hard guy to pass up. I really do. I know Colston Loveland is like a really fun player, and I think right up there as a top 10 talent, but I also would put Tedero McMillan in that tier. I think I think if Tedero McMillan falls, to um, even if Pickens gets extended, Tet's one of those players where it's like, do you just draft him and figure it out later? I think that's interesting. I think Golden in that case is pretty appealing as well. Even if you have those two wide receivers, in Pickens and DK, I do think Golden is this kind of route runner type. He's a little bit different from both of them. So I think Matthew Golden always makes sense in the 11 personnel context. Loveland would be hard to pass up there. He's got medicals on his shoulder. I don't know how comfortable the Steelers will be with that. That's something to keep an eye on with Colston Loveland. Um, so I don't know. I don't think they would take him. I don't think tight end's a big consideration that early. Maybe they would. It would be shocking for him to make it to 21. So I mean, in that scenario, I think you would, be looking at McMillan, Golden, even with Pickens extended. I think you would be looking at weirder picks there. I think you're looking certainly at Nick Eamon-Warrick, Malachi Starks probably at safety. I think you're looking harder at corner. Is Will Johnson there? Trey Amos even. That's a little early for him. Um, is Travion Henderson one of the running backs gone, or is he in play? I mean, it would not be a great board for the Steelers, but the BPA would almost certainly be what wide receiver. Um, so I would imagine they would take one of the wide receivers in that scenario. I think Tedero McMillan or Matthew Golden there would make a lot of sense. Really, really would be a really crazy board. But that's probably where they would end up going. So I think this one's an interesting question as well. Um, what pick could the Steelers make in round one that fans would hate immediately, but would ultimately love in time for a guy that would become a huge star? I'm gonna get this is a little interesting because it implies that a lot of you guys would hate it. And I think generally over the years the Steelers' fan base has become a little smarter. And so where does this come in? Hmm. I mean, listen, I don't think they would like any of the quarterbacks, but I wouldn't bet on that. I wouldn't bet on a quarterback becoming a superstar out of this group either. Um, I guess Shedeur Sanders could fit that mold if he hits his ceiling. But I don't really think I wouldn't peg him for that. Um, I'll tell you what, I think the answer to this would probably the best answer I'll give you, and it's because I've seen a lot of anti-corner sentiment period in round one. I would say Jahdae Barron. I know there's people that will love Jahdae Barron, and love that pick. But there's a lot of people that don't want a corner period. That guy's gonna be a star. I think he's gonna be a star in the way Brian Branch and Cooper DeJean were for the Eagles and the Lions. I think he can transform your defense. I think he'd give this Steelers so much more versatility on the back end of their defense. So my best answer there is Jahdae Barron. I don't think there's necessarily a great pick where the teams, the Steelers fans would hate it, but this guy could become a star. That's a hard one to peg because I think there's a lot of people that love all three D linemen. I think a lot of people don't like Eamon-Warrick. I'm not a huge Nick Eamon-Warrick fan either. At least at 21, I'm not. The quarterbacks, I'm not really sold on them. I wouldn't take a running back. I think Amari Hampton and Travion Henderson could be good players, but love them, I don't know. Jahdae Barron will be the one for me. In fact, he's among my favorite options for the 21. I really love the idea of taking Jahdae Barron if you can do that. This is an interesting one. What is the most realistic way for the Steelers to get back into the second round? There's two ways to do that. I mean, we talked about one of them already. Could you get that second round pick for George Pickens? I don't think they're going to trade George Pickens, but if they get a second round pick for him, I think they would definitely think about it. Certainly, if they got an early to mid second round pick, I think he might be traded. As much as people hate to hear that, I know they've said it a lot on the record, but I do think there comes push to shove where there is a cost and an offer that they would maybe jump at. So maybe that way. I think the actual likeliest way for them to get back there is to trade out of 21. In a scenario where maybe Sanders is off the board or he's on the board and they don't love him and they're not going to pick him there. I think they like Shedeur. Do they love him enough to pick him at 21? I think that's going to be the question, because there's scar tissue left there from the Kenny Pickett pick in 2022. So do they love him enough to take him at 21? If they don't, they can be the team that actually reaps the benefits of him falling. Because you get the Giants to pop up and go to 34. I mean, I don't think the Steelers would hate trading out of the first round completely in this class, because then at 34, I think you were really set up for a nice spot there. You can go corner, you can go, defensive line still. Derek Harmon with his medicals, is he going to fall out of the first round? You could even trade back there and maybe get him. So the way they get back into the second round is probably trading back out of the first round, and acquiring another day two pick while doing that. The other way they could do it is trading George Pickens. We'll see. I'm not certain they're going to get that second round pick for George Pickens, and if they don't, I think he's a Steeler still. So that's kind of where you look at the Pickens stuff. I really think all of it comes together with cost. Steelers aren't shopping him; teams are calling them. They're going to have to be blown away with it. This is another really cool question. Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, and Derek Harmon all available. Who do you take? As for the mid-round quarterbacks, would you rather have Tyler Shuck, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, or someone like Will Howard or Kyle McCord in a later round? So for the first question, if you've listened to the show, you know I'm a big Derek Harmon fan. I think he's the best of those three personally. I know people like DB think Walter Nolan is. I know people like Chris Carter think Kenneth Grant is. So it's kind of your flavor. They're different players. Derek Harmon's more of a five tech that can be a penetrating three tech. Nolan's a pure three tech. Grant's more of a nose that can play three tech. So very different players. I like Harmon the best. I have compared him to Stephon Tuitt. I think he fits very well into what the Steelers want to do there up front. And I think he'd be a great pick for them. So I'm on team Derek Harmon personally there. As for quarterbacks in the middle rounds, um, I think Shuck and Milrow are going to go and start Dart too are going to go in between their picks. I don't think they're going to be there at 83. I don't think Steelers are going to necessarily trade up for them. Of those three, I think I like Milrow the best probably. I like his ceiling. He definitely has issues, of course, if you watch the tape, the accuracy and all of that, but the tools are truly great with Jalen Milrow. But if we're looking at it, my favorite guy in the mid rounds has always been Will Howard. Can they get him in the third or the fourth? I think they can. I like his fit in the offense. I think he's got a great deep ball. I think he really worked on his mechanics over the season. He's much cleaner in his footwork. He's a much more precise thrower now. And you saw after that Michigan game, and he became a really accurate thrower at all levels of the football field. He's definitely got his drawbacks. He's not an elite player by any means. He's not an elite playmaker out of structure. The arm's good. It's not elite, but he's got some tools to work with. He could be a really good long-term backup, maybe even a spot starter type. He actually probably compares pretty good to Mason Rudolph. That's not a bad comparison if you wanted to give him one at the NFL level. So I'm personally in on the Will Howard train. And round four, I think that would be great. In my mock draft today, I mocked Will Howard to the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I do think that is likely. I think they like Will Howard too. This is another good question. What running backs do you think make the most sense for the Steelers based on projected round and team fit? I've heard they like Hampton Henderson, but would prefer they don't go round one running back. I do think the Steelers are not going to go round one running back. I don't think they will. I think there's fans for Henderson and Hampton in the building, but I also think the Steelers are trying to learn from their past a little bit here and are not going to try and take a running back in the first round, unless Aspen Gentry falls. That's not happening, by the way. But if he ever did fall, they would take him. I do think, my favorite fit for them has always been Bashal Tutin in the fourth round. I love his ability to get up and go. I love his explosiveness. He's a guy that's going to get multiple big time runs a year. He can be an instant spark plug in a game. They need explosiveness from the running back position. He would give it to you. He's a great wide zone runner from under center. They don't really have one of those on their roster right now. And he also, the fumble issues are concerning, but they're fixable. And I do think that's the big thing. And I think he has three down upside. So I really like Bashal too. I like RJ Harvey in that fourth round as well. I like Dylan Sampson and DJ Giddens in the third. If you're looking at the fifth, I think you're probably getting into like Jadon Blue territory there. But there's a lot of really fun running backs in this class for the Steelers that they can really go up and down the board on. But my favorite has always been Bashal Tutin just for what he brings to the table, the speed, the explosiveness. I think they need to be more efficient on the ground. So I've always been a big Bashal Tutin fan in that regard. This is interesting as well. Do they draft a QB now? And if so, and if not, why would they wait until next year? It's no guarantee. That's the kind of argument against drafting a quarterback next year, right? The waiting idea is, well, we don't know what 2026 is. So here's what I'll say, guys. If you're in an NFL team, you kind of have to logistically guess. But the Steelers know that they can't afford to miss again on a quarterback. Because if they do, I mean, even for Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan, who have great job security, I just am not sure they're going to get another shot at that. Even for how patient the Steelers are, I think it's a bit of a hard sell um, for the Steelers to get another shot at that. And so I look at, the quarterback situation, and if they draft the wrong guy, they're going to just set themselves back again, right? It's not like, they're suddenly in a perfect world now just because they drafted Shadur Sanders, for example. There's probably going to be better prospects next year than Shadur Sanders. And they have preliminary grades on these guys, right? They've watched, Lenore Sellers. They've watched Drew Aller. They've watched Nico Iamaleava. They've watched all these players, and they have guys that you probably don't even know on the board. There's two names that I can think of right now that aren't getting talked about. Fernando Mendoza is one of them. The Cal to Indiana transfer. He's a guy that they really love. And the league loves, not the Steelers specifically, but the NFL loves. The league thinks the 2026 class is going to be much better than the 2025 class. And usually they're right on this. I remember last year at this time, this was not viewed as a good class in 25. It was not viewed in one, it was not viewed in a light that was expected to be a great class. And so the Steelers kind of have to guesstimate, if you will, next year and how good next year will be. But that's what every team does at this position specifically. But they've already even started scouting 2027 guys, right? And I think 2027, the early buzz around 2027 is that class is going to be incredible, but 2026 should be good. Should have, three or four guys that you can maybe really trust on there. And so that's why. I mean, it's guessing, of course, there's nothing certain, but drafting isn't an exact science. A lot of drafting is really honestly guesswork, and that's peak guesswork. But that is exactly what the Steelers look at. So last question I want to go to. I guess we can't get out of here without talking about Shadur Sanders. Um, so let's talk about Shadur Sanders. Um, what grade would you give Sanders? And what would the grade be for the Steelers if they drafted Shedeur Sanders in round one? Well, if the Steelers drafted Shedeur in round one, I will have grade articles coming out during the draft. I will grade them after every pick is done. My Shedeur Sanders grade for them would probably be like a C minus D plus. I just don't probably a C minus. I think that would be about right. Listen, guys, I've talked about this. He's not a rotational thrower. He's very linear in his mechanics. Not great because he lacks the power through his core and his his lower body. So he's very much a linear throw. It's all arm. That's significant. We've seen two guys fix that before, so it's not like it's unfixable. Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott have both very much fixed that coming into their NFL careers, but it is a tough thing to fix. He doesn't have a strong arm naturally. He could get more juice on it just because if he does open up and become a rotational thrower, he can get more juice on it, but the velocity through the middle of the field to those tight windows isn't there necessarily. It's somewhat lacking at times. So that's an issue in and of itself. And then he has that pocket presence issues, man. I mean he drifts instead of sticking in the pocket space, so he can run into sacks. And he's not an elite athlete. He's not a bad athlete. He's a leader. He's confident. I think the character side of this is being way overblown, to be quite honest with you. I think his character is quite high. From what I've heard around the league, there's a lot of people that really like Shador as a character. He's got bravado about him. I think that's a good thing, to be quite honest with you, as a quarterback. He's very accurate to all three levels of the football field. He's very good above the neck. I think as a processor, he's very much there. So I do think, Shador has pluses, and you could sell it to me, but it's not great. And so my grade on Shador was around two grade. There's a certain team that can pick Shador and I think win. I think it would primarily be an NFC team ready to win. If the Vikings didn't have JJ McCarthy, I think they would be a phenomenal Shador landing spot. That's the type of team I look at for Shador and where he would go. The Steelers, I think are an interesting fit of that, but they're in the AFC, and I've said this before. I would like to go for ceiling rather than floor. I think you're chasing floor with Shador, so I'm personally not in favor of it. It's certainly better than Dart, Milrow, or Shuck or whoever there. He's a better prospect than Pickett was, but again, that's not the bar you're putting yourself up to. You want to find the next star quarterback, not just the next good quarterback. And so that's kind of it for today, folks. Wanted to take some questions for you guys, just give a bit of a kind of draft preview, talk about multiple stories that you guys have had. Tomorrow I will be back as well. We will talk one last time before the NFL draft. Leave some questions in the comments you guys might want to answer that I didn't answer today about that. Of course, we will also be talking after their first round pick, whoever they select. I'll make my official prediction tomorrow of who I think they will pick. In my mock draft today, I had Derek Harmon, but I'm still gathering information just like everybody else is around this time of year. So I will let you guys know who I think they're going to pick tomorrow during the podcast. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell for more, guys. Thanks for listening.